Bien, buenas tardes a todos.
Well, good evening to you all, and welcome to this Fábrica de Armas. In one of the key events of this week of the events for the commemorating the Princesa of Asturias Awards. In this case, an event dedicated to Anne Carson, who, as you all know, is the laureate for the Princesa of Asturias Awards for Literature. She's a poet, she's a translator, she's a scholar of the humanities. And last June 18th, the jury of this award, under the leadership and in the words of Santiago Muñoz Machado, agreed to confer this award to the Canadian writing for having attained levels of intensity and intellectual standing that place her among the most outstanding of present-day writers. To which he added, from the study of the Greco-Latin world, she has built a body of innovative poetics in which the vitality of great classical thought acts as a map to invite the reader to elucidate the complexities of the current moment in time. Her oeuvre maintains a commitment to emotion and thought, with the study of tradition and the renewed presence of the humanities as a way to achieve an enhanced awareness of our time. So it's proverbially difficult to summarize in a few lines the nature and scope of a body of work. Even more so, in my case, I've been privileged to be able to translate 3 of her books, and edit another 2. But from this time, I can't help but remember the verses by Rubén Darío, which he called Songs of Life and Hope. And he defined his youth as very 18th century and very ancient and very modern, bold, cosmopolitan. If altering with the following verse we were to say, with Sappho strong and Emily ambiguous, Emily Dickinson, of course, we would have a very close portrait of the impact, the tsunami, in fact, that her work has had. Audacious, intense, and cosmopolitan on poetry and contemporary literature. From the publication of Eros the Bittersweet in 1986, the way she conjugates intimate knowledge and philological knowledge of the ancient classics, in particular the archaic lyrical poetic tradition with key references of the modern age, Anna Akhmatova, Paul Celan, Samuel Beckett, or Jean-Luc Godard. She seduced any number of readers and contemporary artists. The title of her first great work, Plain Water, Essays and Poetry, it was edited in 1995, and it points clearly to this hybrid, miscellaneous nature of this proposal. So they coming together and live together, essays, poetic series, travelogues, such as The Way of St. James, and a seductive mixture that subsequent books have only broadened. And so, men in their free time included the citizen of the life of Tolstoy, Akhmatova, and in certain forms of treatment, as in a documentary script. So at the beginning of this year, we find a box, so to speak, of 22 notebooks of varying lengths. It lists very much in the tradition of Borges and short essays, versions of other poets, scripts for performances, elaborate plays on words, series of poems proper, etc. Over the years, the reasons for this work have become more serious, more grave and somber, if you will, as the author becomes more and more interested in the three great tragedies, Sophocles, Aeschylus, Euripides, and some of whose dramas she has translated for the contemporary stage. Carson's work is, at the end of the day, a statement of the fundamental loneliness of human beings and our inability to communicate, but also in the economic nature of interpersonal relationships and our dependence of a fallible language that we must translate time and time again, which necessarily leads us to error and misunderstandings. And thus, the great paradox is to write with pleasure about something tragic, which reminds us of our own Antonio Gamero when he writes, "All poetry is written from the perspective of death, and that pain and pleasure are enmeshed for me in the poetic act." So, such is the eros defined by Sappho and studied by Carson in her first work, Glucubicron, literally bittersweetness, according to the word coined from the poet of Lesbos. I would like to close my intervention by citing the designer, José María Cruz Novilla, when he stated that if anything distinguishes the artist from their peers is that he doesn't shoot the arrow with the aim of hitting the bullseye. Instead, the artist shoots the arrow, and wherever it sticks, that is where the bullseye is drawn. Thus is the work of Anne Carson. All of it a bullseye, reasoned intuition, scholarship and risk, fascinating intensity. This recital will be divided into two parts. First, we will hear the reading of the text, and we will hear it read by the author herself. Cassandra Float Can, included in Float, there was originally a three-part conference dictated for the first time at the Music Academy of Brooklyn in 2008, with slides of the work by Gordon Mataclark and large signage created by Robert Curry. We will then have a short time to have a video conference chat with her in English and Spanish with the author. Before then, however, we must put our eyes and ears to Cassandra by Anne Carson. Thank you very much.
Cassandra Float Can. This is a lyric essay on the subject of translation and disruption, my two favorite topics. Cassandra Float Can. Everywhere Cassandra found she could float. How did she float? With her float can. Does that sound like a tautology? But the arts of prophecy are often tautological. They reason in a circle. The prophet must prove to you that she is a prophet by telling you unbelievable news, which you will only believe if you already regard her as a prophet. If the news is not unbelievable, then she is just a news source. If the news subsequently comes true, then she was a prophet, but it doesn't matter now that the news is widely available. Cassandra's is a conundrum of the veil. Where is the edge of the new? Where is the edge of belief? Is it possible to believe something truly unbelievable? How does that begin? Is there a crack of light under the door? How do you know to see it as light? Is there an edge of light all around the dark mass of your life up to this moment? Can you want it gone? Can you say, flick-flack, it's gone? Cassandra can. Who is Cassandra? For a dime, she will tell you that the swimming pool is full of blood. Like space-time, she is non-linear, non-narrative, and the most beautiful of Priam's daughters, according to Homer, who says that when she stood up to prophesy, she shone like a lamp in a bomb shelter. Your eye is inclined to bounce off, then glue itself onto Cassandra's surface. The longer you look at her, the more fiercely you have to struggle to see her light, which seems to sink its beam into you at a hotter and hotter frequency. Eventually you notice that something stinks. It is the gelatin of your own eyeball. A smell at once small and gigantic. Some people find it sexual, I do not. To me it is the smell of matter experiencing its own future. Scientifically, the smell of a rip in space-time. Sometimes I feel I spend my whole life rewriting the same page. It is a page with essay on translation at the top, and then quite a few paragraphs of good strong prose. These begin to break down towards the middle of the page. Syntax decays. Perforations appear. By the end, there isn't much left but a few flakes of language roaming near the margins, looking as if they want to become an art of pure shape. Here's another fact about me. Whenever I am engaged on a translation project, I experience continually, offside my vision, a sensation of veils flying up. As brightness blows the rising, wide, cold rush the skull. I've come to call the sensation Cassandra, because I first noticed it one day in school when I was reading a passage of Aeschylus' Agamemnon, the passage where Cassandra cries out in Greek, "Atatatoi papoida." This cry is famous. It leads into 300 lines of vision and prophecy, in which Cassandra foretells the past and the future of the house of Atreus, including the fact of her own death. At the midpoint of this telling, she utters these lines: "Behold, no longer my oracle out from veils shall be glancing like a newly married bride, but as brightness blows the rising sun open, it will rush my oceans forward onto light, a grief more deep than me." What is it like to be a prophet? Everywhere Cassandra ran, she found she was already there. Everywhere Cassandra ran, the glue was coming up off the edge of the page, and when she pulled at it, this page was underneath. This page on which I am telling you that everywhere Cassandra ran, she found she could float. You may think I am making the matter unnecessarily complicated, the matter of Cassandra everywhere she ran. But let's return to her opening line, "Atatatoi papoida." This utterance is a scream. It is untranslatable, yet not meaningless. A scream conveys specific emotion and can make things happen. In this case, the scream is also metrically exact, fitted into the scansion of the verses around it. Often in English translation, such utterances are rendered by the word "alas." Should the word "alas" seem inadequate, the translator may choose to transliterate the Greek letters of the scream into English sounds, as I did when I said "atatatoi papoida," on the grounds that this is more pure and true. Is it more pure and true? Perhaps a prior question is in order. What is Cassandra doing speaking Greek? She is, after all, a Trojan princess who has never been away from home before. Now, generally, we refrain from asking this kind of question about the logic of a play. We don't really want to listen to Cassandra speaking ancient Trojan for the next half hour, and there is a dramaturgic convention called the will suspension of disbelief that makes it okay. But in this play, Aeschylus has already punctured the convention, for he begins the Cassandra scene with Cassandra standing silent on stage for 270 lines. Then Clytemnestra shouts at her, "What's the matter? Don't you speak Greek?" Aeschylus would like us to see the veils flying up in Cassandra's mind. would like us to be wondering at what level of herself she is translating some pure gash of Trojan emotion into a metrically perfect line of Greek tragic verse, and what that translation has to do with the arts of prophecy. Because in both cases there is some action of cutting through surfaces to a site that has no business being underneath. What is the future doing underneath the past? Or Greek metrics inside a Trojan silence? And how does it alter you to see it there floating, and how can it float? I am interested in people who cut through things. When Aeschylus' Agamemnon was performed at Cambridge University, England, as the Cambridge Greek play for 1900, the role of Cassandra was taken by a young man named J.F. Crace. Mr. Crace wore veils and made a wonderful impression. He was probably encouraged, as were other young actors who played Cassandra in those days, to let his voice crack on stage during Cassandra's long speech. This was thought to add poignancy to the delivery and show the prophet stimulated to a breaking point. Cracks, cuts, breaks, gashes, splittings, slicings, rips, tears, conical intersects, disruptions, etymologies. Here's another one I like. It has nothing to do with Cassandra. We need a rest from Cassandra. I have a friend who is a philosopher. He told me that the phenomenologist Edmund Husserl, who lived 1859 to 1938 and wrote a dozen or so books in his lifetime, left behind at his death some 30,000 pages of unpublished manuscript. Moreover, these pages are written in shorthand. The notion of 30,000 pages of Bavarian shorthand fills me with wonder. Why did Husserl want to write so fast? What thought was so urgent that he had to scrape it straight off the surface of his synapses, rather than let it move through the usual sequence of conceptual and syntactic formation? What exactly is the usual sequence that Husserl was trying to disrupt? It may be relevant that Husserl was a mathematician before he was a phenomenologist. Mathematics has in common with shorthand an intention to reduce or abstract a relatively larger piece of meaning to a relatively smaller set of marks. But mathematics is not done in haste. We think of a mathematical equation as something that happens at the end of a long process of question and pondering, not first and fast. Shorthand, on the other hand, is a tachygraphic system enabling a person to write legibly at the rate of speech. What is the rate of speech? It is tied to the rate at which thought moves in the mind. But we all know from the sensation of it that thought usually moves more quickly and in a different way than speech. Speech is already a kind of shorthand. Yet speech again is quicker and different than sentences written down. There seem to be veils upon veils upon veils here. Where is the original surface? If we were romantics, and possibly some of us are romantics, we might imagine that there is in our minds one or two beats before a thought forms itself into anything like mental speech, into an order of communication, something earlier, rougher, more gripped, more frail, more saturated, something that will dry away like the dew or crumble like prehistoric paint as soon as it's exposed to air, something that compared to a sentence is still wild. Husserl wanted to press the lips of this thing onto paper and make a mark. What did he plan to do with the marks afterwards? Whatever his plan was, 30,000 pages of manuscript attest he could not carry it out. Or maybe he had no plan. Maybe he just wanted to cut the thing free from use and let it disappear into its own presence. There was an artist named Gordon Matta Clark, born New York City, 1943, who completed more than 50 artworks before he died untimely, age 35, in 1978. Not one of Gordon Matta Clark's artworks is extant. To know what they were like, you have to consult archival photographs or ask people who saw them. What Gordon Matta Clark liked to do was cut things, usually big things. He split a house in half in New Jersey in 1974. He cut huge circular and boat-shaped holes in the walls, floors, and ceilings of a Paris office block in 1977. He made a diagonal pattern of cuts up through the floors, ceilings, and roof of a Chicago apartment complex in 1978. These structures were all slated for demolition before he found them, and he got permission to intervene in and alter the process of ruin, which ran its course after he'd finished. His best-known work is one for which he did not get permission. In 1975, prowling around the New York City waterfront, he found an abandoned pier that appealed to him. He broke into Pier 52 and spent 2 months making cuts 20 to 30 feet long and 10 to 18 inches thick in the corrugated steel of the wharf building. Pie-shaped, sickle-shaped, and elliptical cuts. He also cut through the floor to expose the water below. He said various things about these cuts. He liked the way light passed alive across the floor. He wondered how it would be to sit and watch this passage of light over the span of, say, a year. He wanted to make volume visible. He wanted to see the Hudson River sparkle inside. He spoke of liberating the compressed force of a building simply by making a hole. And he hoped to retranslate the space into something he could taste. Soon enough, the police found out about the retranslation going on at Pier 52. The site was confiscated, the building padlocked shut, and charges brought against Gordon Matta Clark, who left the country for a time. The work, which he had entitled Day's End, continued to be visited by people who broke in. It was soon demolished by the New York City Economic Development Agency. By the time of Gordon Matta Clark's death 3 years later, critics were calling Pier 52 a radiant, perilous cathedral and an example of a revolutionary new genre of behavioral architecture. So it goes with the prophets. You see them float, and how they float, and how can they? Gordon Matta Clark did not call his project architecture. He invented a new word, an-architecture. This word has a nice etymology. If you take the prefix an as an indefinite article, it implies that his work is one of many possible architectures. If you take an as a negative, his work is an antithesis or antidote to whatever architecture claims to be. I just like to get in there and alter it, he said. Each of his alterations was analytical. He did months of research before starting to cut a building. The cuts were based on exact knowledge of what he called the semiotic system of the building's construction. His method was to cut away surface until he could see what was really inside. He made a building into an abstract of itself. Not so much to create beauty as to get information. He said his cuts were probes. He was probing for something he called the thin edge. This is from an interview he did in 1974. He says, "It was kind of the thin edge of what was being seen that interested me as much as the views that were created." Let's pause to consider the etymology of the word etymology. It comes from Greek etymos, an adjective meaning real, true, actual, and logos, the basic word for story, account, analysis. But etumos in turn has an etymology, probably derived from the verb enai, to be, to exist. So an etymology can be thought to give the true meaning of the word because it has isness in it. The etymologist makes cuts that show being as it floats inside things and how it floats and how can it. To return to Cassandra, her big prophetic scene in Aeschylus' Agamemnon begins with her screaming, "Atatatoi papoi da," as I said earlier. After screaming, she calls out the name of Apollo 6 times, then again a 7th time, but the 7th time, by shifting the inflection of the name slightly, she shows its etymology. For Apollo's name is cognate with the Greek verb apolesthai, to destroy utterly, to kill, slay, demolish, lay waste. By crying out, Apollon emos, Cassandra can designate the god as my Apollo and my destroyer at the same time in the same words. If words are veils, what do they hide? What difference does it make to see a wharf building as a cathedral for 10 seconds or 2 months or a year? To see Apollo, the god of healing and truth, as a murderous pun? I only accidentally learned Greek from a bored high school Latin teacher who decided to teach me to read Sappho on my lunch hour. My entire career as a classicist is a sort of preposterous etymology of the word lunch. When Clytemnestra shouts at Cassandra, "What's wrong, don't you speak? What's wrong, don't you speak Greek?" Cassandra responds with a scream and an etymology and a prophetic vision. She splits open our idea of what it is to know Greek. She removes the walls and floorboards, and suddenly we are in a site slated for demolition. This site which is not just her body, not just the city of Troy, not just the house of Atreus, but our whole way of knowing the truth about such things, our longhand approach to every question and answer, our entire careers as classicists or architects or prophets or whatever we are, the way we float and how we float and can we float. Cassandra can. Gordon Matta Clark had a twin brother who was mentally unstable all his life and who died by jumping out the window of Gordon's own studio in 1976. I also had a brother and am perhaps over-inclined to view brothers as causal. So, leaving causality aside, I wonder if having a brother who comes and goes from his mind all the time might make a person especially aware of holes and splits and disruptions. There is a thin edge that appears where no edge is scheduled. What a sudden amount of information is released there. What a startling amount of fear and pity. After his brother died, Gordon Matta Clark made a work in his memory at a gallery in Paris. He dug a large hole in the floor of the basement of the gallery and sculpted a staircase of shallow descending steps on one side of the hole. Working by the light of a bulb suspended from the gallery above, he was visible to passers-by at street level through a vent in the gallery floor. When the staircase was complete, the hole was filled in again. No trace now remains except a few Polaroids of Gordon Matta Clark digging. Cassandra's final words in Aeschylus' Agamemnon are concerned with pity. Here are 3 translations of lines 1327 to 1330 of the play, just before she goes off stage to her death. Translation 1. Alas for human fortunes! If a man has good luck, some shadow could overturn it. When his luck goes bad, a wet sponge erases the whole picture. For this I feel the greatest pity. Translation 2. But you, O human things, a shadow is enough to, a sponge could wipe you off. You who barely float, and how you float, and can you? You I pity. Exit Cassandra. Translation 3. Site demolished and removed. The end. Thank you and good night.
So now is the time for Anne Carson to appear on the screen, live from Iceland and not from New York, as you might have expected. Hello, how are you? We can hear you.
Can't hear me.
Yes, yes, I can now. I can now.
Now you can hear me.
Yes, well, congratulations. You are the
Thank you.
2020 Princess of Asturias Laureate for Literature.
So I am.
So, yes, congratulations. It's a pity we can't have you here in Asturias, in Spain, but it's been a dreadful year for travel and for all of us, really. Are you still? This is going to be a racy and fast interview, I'm afraid, but are you still nervous or wary of the form of the interview? Because I think I've read somewhere that you found the form of the interview disquieting, and that it made you lie or evade the truth.
Yeah. At the best of times, I usually when asked questions about my writing, I just go blank. But then, yes, I make things up. Could be true, could be lies. Sorry.
I am interested in people who cut through things. That's a sentence that struck me when I read it in the original some time ago, and now we've heard it again. Yes?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Is that a description, perhaps, of the way you yourself move through things sometimes in your essays and your poetry? You like to cut through things?
Yeah, probably it is a good description. I think the objective is usually economy, because I really don't like using too many words. And cutting through verbiage is a way to create a surface that is economical and as spare as it can be.
And another passage towards the end of this essay where you recalled your lessons, your Greek lessons when you were a teenager with a Latin teacher. I think her name was Alice Cowan.
Yes, right, Mrs. Cowan.
Yeah, Mrs. Cowan. What do you think is left of that teenage girl who discovered Sappho's poetry in a local bookshop? Because you seem to have circled the poetry of Sappho, to have come back to it time and again, and it's become a kind of center point of your writing.
I hadn't thought of it that way as a center point, but I do keep coming back to the ancient Greeks and their poetry because of the amazing quality of it and the original being that's in it. And I suppose Sappho is the first example of that I met, so it's somehow foundational for me. And I also do like to think with gratitude about Mrs. Cowan, because she taught me a way of life as well as a way of a way of study. So it connects me again to her and to that time.
You said once that the day I find the limits of the Greek language, I guess I'll stop studying it, but I haven't found them yet. I wonder if has the day arrived, or
Not yet, no.
will it ever do?
I'll let you know.
Okay, but I found it striking that you have chosen this essay to be read tonight because, on the one hand, it's an essay. It's not poetry, which is your other one of your modes of writing, but it's also a study on translation and a study on the Greek language. At least, you know, you make certain references to it, and it moves across your essay. So translation is still very much, I think, you know, the center of your writing or your worries, creative worry, I think.
I think pretty much everything one does with one's mind is a kind of translation, because you have to move it from the screen of the mind to the screen of language, and that is not the same place, not the same method. So I find it's just a short step from there to translating from one human language to another language, in the sense of ancient Greek to English. The whole process is a transcription from language to language, or from image to language. A lot of what I like to do when I'm really thinking about something is draw it, and then drawing becomes something that needs to be translated too into what we call language.
But there seems to be a sense...
You know what I mean?
Yes.
You are a translator.
I am.
So you are a very good translator. So you should probably understand this.
Yes, but you particularly seem to view this as a loss, because you say that the Greek language has an aura, it has a certain nature of being the original language for you, that the Greek words are pristine, are clean, are more powerful than the languages that have come afterwards. You said that...
Yes, that may be true. I tried to address that in the essay that I just read. This sort of romantic idea that there is something more pure and more true in the very early words that we have in the human evolution. I'm not sure it's true, but I do like to believe it, and it's helpful, it's energizing to believe it. And when I go back to the Greek poets ever, I don't find that the words that they use are able to be ended, as you said earlier. The limits have not been reached yet by me. So there's something there mysterious.
And I mention this because I think it's also apparent from your essay, is that there is a pedagogical element, a didactic element in your essay writing. And you said, I think you quite recently, that I am inescapably a pedagogue.
Yes.
What's the line dividing your teaching and your scholarly work from your creative work? How do they feed each other, if they do, which I think they do, but perhaps you can elaborate or illuminate us in this regard.
I don't think there's any line or even any border crossing. It's just a passage back and forth. I think they probably nourish one another, but I don't police that in any way. And if I were to try to, I think either of the activities would become forced or artificial. It's, what would I say? A kind of drawback of my nature that I do want to explain things to people, maybe too much. So that's why my poetry becomes didactic. After I did the reading for you, the Cassandra float can, I rather regretted subjecting you to 25 long minutes of didacticism instead of just some jolly short poems, but that's kind of who I am.
I think I may have explained myself badly. I think you don't explain. I think you show. I think what happens in
That
your
would be
essays,
better.
You kind of make things visible and you show them to the reader. But I don't find any explanation, any need to move those conclusions forward. You just show and let the reader reach his or her own conclusions, I think.
I hope so. I've always tried in teaching, even in lecturing at school, to avoid telling people what to think, rather to take them on some kind of a little journey where they end up thinking that somehow.
Let's move to translation again, because your latest, you've been translating quite a few dramas from Aeschylus, from Sophocles, from Euripides. Yeah. Your latest work for the stage is a version of Helen by Euripides called, or titled, Norma Jean Baker of Troy. And I wanted to ask you what drew you to Euripides in the first place, because he doesn't seem to be, at least you have admitted that he's not strictly to your taste as an author. And why Marilyn Monroe in that? Why is Marilyn Monroe, Norma Jean Baker mixed up with the figure of Helen?
You don't think that makes sense?
I think it makes perfect sense. But,
okay,
but
good.
I think Helen is almost like the first pop star of the Western art and literature in a way. I mean, she recurs throughout 2,000 years in art and literature.
Yeah, she has that same
iconic,
inexplicable charm as Helen of Troy. Marilyn Monroe. I put them together for that reason. But Euripides, as you say, is not my favorite tragic poet, but in that play, the Helen, he's at his most metaphorical and profound, I think. And I particularly have been puzzled by that play and how to translate it since years ago at school. So I just eventually got around to thinking that Marilyn Monroe would be the right vehicle to make it come across in English. And also it was commissioned as a project for a particular actor, the actor Ben Whishaw, British actor, who eventually played the part of Helen. So I did it with him in mind.
Ben Whishaw, who played Keats in Jane Campion's movie. So there is this Keats connection with The Beauty of the Husband too, with your quotations from Keats. So that's an interesting full circle.
That's true.
I asked that before about Euripides because you said mostly the fact that he's actually not to my taste as a writer or dramatist. So that puts a useful edge between us. I find that a very interesting remark, because there is the idea of a distance between you and, obviously, Euripides. There's also the notion of edge, which is always, edge is ambiguous. It's both cutting, it's also a breach. Is your aim somewhat to create a certain edge, likewise, between you and your reader, a certain distance, which I think can be conducive to understanding or to appreciation?
That's an interesting way to put that. I certainly like to have a bit of distance from the reader, because otherwise we over-identify with each other and everything becomes just emotional. I hadn't thought of it as an edge, but I do like the sharpness of thinking that comes from being clear in the mind, the kind of daylight. So maybe that is what I'm trying for all the time.
A certain lucidity, a daylight lucidity, or...
Yes.
Yeah.
As we have here in Iceland, blindingly every day.
I was going to ask you, you're speaking from Iceland, not from from New York, where you also live. And Iceland is very far away from Greece and the Greek islands. And there seems to me that you have a passion for all things Greek, especially for the language and the literature. But your landscapes and your atmospheres are very much northern. They are from the north. And it seems to me a curious, not a contradiction, but there is, I think it's paradoxical in a way, or it could be construed as paradoxical.
I guess so. I'm not really disinclined to inhabit paradox, but I don't think I've ever been drawn to the modern Greek world as a place to live or visit. It's very beautiful, but it's not the ancient world. I don't want to replace the ancient world as it is in my fantasy of it with some mere reality. And besides that, I am a northern person from northern Canada. I don't think you ever can wash out that aesthetic from yourself. When you're born in a certain landscape, you take that with you as your desired home everywhere you are.
In any case, the light of tragedy, the Greek light of tragedy, is a chiseled light. It's almost a dark light too. So it's not the sensuous light of the Mediterranean that we now, we imagine now. It's harsher, I think.
When I went to Greece sometime in the 80s, I think, it was full of discos. That's not what I wanted to know.
Let's move on, because we've been spending some quite time in Greece, which is lovely, but a lot of your work has, especially in these later years, has been written in collaboration with other artists, namely Robert Curry, but you have also written on commission for installations for modern composers, in dialogue with contemporary art. It seems as if you were happier with the notion of being an artist rather than being strictly a writer, or to face writing more in an artistic fashion.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever wanted to be mainly a writer. As I said, mostly I start ideas by drawing them. And collaboration is another whole question, more complicated question, but I kind of got into collaborating with people because of meeting Curry, my present collaborator and husband. And he thought it would help me not be bored with my own work and mind, which it did. Besides which, when you collaborate with people, they give you topics or assignments. You don't have to think up what to do next. That's a great advantage.
Yeah. So you find it easier to write on commission than
Yes.
writing more personal text?
Yes.
Yes.
I like it just as much as I like being at school, where they give you a task every day, and then when you perform it, they tell you you're a good person.
So you're saying you are good at homework, or you're happy when you are
Yes.
making homework. Okay.
I always loved doing homework.
But in any case, you always bring those commissions to the realm of the personal, and sometimes even intimate. I mean, you bring those energies to your own field of interest. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Great.
How else would I do it? That's all I know.
You said, I think you were selling yourself short years ago when you said that you didn't have a musical ear, or not in the sense of the musical ear that traditional poets have, you know. And so you say, I will never be the kind of poet that will write beautiful musical sonnets, let's say. Obviously, you have a different sort of music, but you have written quite a lot for musical compositions, and you have written libretti, and you have written oratorio. Actually, this latest play has spoken and parts, and other parts where, you know, they sing your
Yes.
lines. How do you work with that? How do you prepare for that kind of work?
I don't think I work with it very well at all, because it is true that I'm not inherently musical or even rhythmical. And most people who, because of collaboration, end up having to put my language to music, find it very difficult, find it a rebarbative experience, because the language is not thinking of itself as music before it's given over to them. I wish I could do that, but I just have a very, I don't know what the word is, blundering sense of how music works.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have a lot of musicality inside my own language naturally. So it's kind of a mess, usually.
I noticed in Float that, and before too, in previous books, you have grown quite fond of lists, of inventories, of listings. This is quite a Virginian, for instance, interest. But where does that passion for listings come from for inventories? You know, I'm talking about that lovely chapbook you wrote on Yves Klein, the French painter, Yves Klein, which is a list.
Klein.
Yeah, the eras of Yves Klein.
Yes. Huh. No, I don't know. I have no answer to that. I guess they're just fun to do.
Yes, and they're fun to read too, as well.
That's ideal then.
Yeah, we have only, I think, like 5 minutes left, but and I wanted to ask you about, obviously, we are in Spain. there is a short section, not a short section, there is a section of plain water called The Road to Santiago, which was published as a little book here in Spain called El Camino de Santiago. So you actually made the pilgrimage to Santiago when you were in the 80s, in the 1980s, I believe?
Yeah, 1983.
1983. I think it's a funny line I found here, which you said, a pilgrim is a person who is up to something. What is it? And I wonder if you managed to find out what was it, what the enigma was, or what the mystery was.
Nope. Still an enigma.
You ended up as innocent of the meaning of pilgrimage as you started.
I did. Yes.
Okay. Well, I won't ask you about your vision of Spain at the time, because obviously that comes quite clearly in the book. Obviously, ever since the 1960s, I think, North American poets, I mean, you're Canadian, but you also have a lot of connections and links with American poetry, have had an interest in Spanish-speaking poetry, especially Lorca, Vallejo, Neruda, all those poets have been quite influential. I wonder if you have, I mean, I have to ask you this question, but I wonder if you have any, or you relate to some of the Spanish-speaking poets in our tradition. I was thinking particularly of the mystics, because you had an interest in the mystic tradition at the time that you wrote The Creation. So I was thinking of Teresa de Ávila, San Juan de la Cruz, San John of the Cross, all those poets.
Yeah, St. John of the Cross in particular, I was reading at the time. And St. Teresa, a little bit, not so much. But yeah, Neruda is inexhaustibly interesting. And so Machado, if that's the right way to say it.
But Machado seems to be quite far from your, apparently from your interest, but what do you find in him that, what draws you to him particularly?
I think the economy of expression, which, as I said before, is an interest of mine, and this sort of distillation of wisdom into communicable forms, friendly forms.
I'll be finishing, but now in last week, your book Economy of the Unlost has been published in Spain by Vaso Roto, which has published a few of your books, and you say there that for the Greeks, to create a poem is to create something that is graceful and that becomes a gift that people want to give and to receive. And that reciprocity extends in time and helps those cultures cohere. It helps those cultures take shape, so to speak, that constant give and take. Do you feel this notion of the poem or of the work of art applies to our times? Can it apply to our times? Or because we are large cultures. We are not small cultures bound to a city-state. So I wonder if that notion of the art of the work of art as a gift is still relevant or valid.
I think it's much more difficult nowadays in the huge populations in which we live, and with the dissemination of everything through the internet, so there is no a real beginning of a poem or the work of art and its interaction with its public. There's no sort of time for giving the gift. It's sort of everywhere at once on the internet, and then it doesn't matter. So I don't really know if the structure of the event is still possible. The emotion of gratitude is still built into the work of art, because no artwork can exist without an audience. The grace of it goes back and forth somehow, mysteriously, and that I think that still happens to us. It's just harder to get to the situation where it will be felt that way.
Well, I think you can be relieved because, you know, the room is full of people, the hall is full of people, and we have, I think, lived, you know, we have experienced this conversation and the whole event as a gift. Listening to you reading your essay and having this conversation. I know that you are in your house in Iceland and feeling perhaps a little disembodied because, you know, you can see the people in the hall, but you know, it's full and...
I can see the shadows of
yeah.
them. Hello, okay. Shadows.
I know you've been invited to Spain many times, but we haven't managed to bring you here. This was the perfect occasion. Obviously, it hasn't been possible, but can we expect to have you here in Spain in the near future?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, that's
as long as you have a swimming pool.
Oh, there are plenty of swimming pools. There are plenty of swimming pools. We can even arrange, you know, wherever you want, on the top, on a rooftop, or near the coast, or you know, we can arrange that.
Okay, we'll work that out.
Okay.
Later.
Well, thanks very much, Ms. Carson, for your time, for your patience, replying to this. Have you lied a lot? Have you told many lies?
About 17% of the time.
All right. I think that's quite acceptable.
Approximately.
Yes. Thanks very much, and we hope to see you again very soon here in Spain with us.
Me too.
So long. Ya está. Muchas gracias a todos por su presencia y por su escucha paciente. Hasta la próxima.